pie crust. Now, pie crust is controversial. Everybody has their own opinions about how to make it. This is how I make it. I've tested many different ways. Other ways are not wrong. This is just how I make it and how I find a lot of success teaching beginners. So what I have in my bowl here is 180 grams, which is 1.5 cups of flour, all-purpose flour. I also have 2 grams of salt, which is about a half teaspoon of salt. I'm just gonna mix this together. You'll notice I have no mixing tools on my station. I don't want you to use a spatula. I don't want you to use anything to mix with other than your hands. I am going to use 2 different types of fats. Here's where things start getting controversial. I'm going to use mostly butter, but I do like a little bit of shortening in my pie crust. This is 30 grams of shortening, which is about 2.5 tablespoons of shortening. Now, I am actually going to rub this through my flour. So I'm just taking my fingertips and I'm just starting to rub this through. I want to kind of get all of this flour coated in fat. Because what happens is when water comes into contact with flour, that is when gluten starts forming. So shortening is a type of fat that is going to coat this flour. It's really nice and soft. It's really easy to get this worked in. So it's going to kind of coat the flour and create a little bit of a barrier between the water and the flour so that gluten can't start forming as quickly, because gluten is the thing that is going to make your pie crust tough. We need a little bit of gluten to give us structure, but we don't want too much development of that gluten because that is going to make things chewy instead of flaky. So I'm just using my fingertips to start working this through until this looks like kind of like a coarse cornmeal, okay? It's really pebbly looking. I can tell all of that fat has been distributed through the flour and everything has a light coating of fat. Popping in here to add that fat also shortens gluten strands. So when the flour is coated in fat like that, it will not allow the chains of gluten to get as long. This is where the word shortening actually comes from. So it won't create as much chewiness. And shortening also has a higher melting point. So this is another reason why I like to use a little bit of it, because it won't melt as quickly in the oven the way butter does, which allows the crust to set more quickly before the fat can start melting and shrinking. So it will help our pie crust not shrink up on us as much. Now I'm going to move on to my butter, and I'm going to keep my butter much bigger than I did my shortening. This butter is cold, straight from the fridge. You want it to be, very, very cold, because our goal here is to keep our butter solid. We don't want it to melt. We don't want it to become cohesive with the mixture. So I like to use a bench knife to slice this. I'm just going to kind of come in here and start slicing this up. It doesn't really matter how thick you slice it. This is kind of about what I'm shooting for. I need 6 tablespoons of this, which is 85 grams. And I'm going to slice all of that. And I'm going to toss all these slices into my mixing bowl. I like to do a quick little toss just to coat everything in some flour before I start working it in. Now, it's important to work quickly here because our fingers are warm. It's going to start warming up the butter. We don't want it to get too warm. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up each piece of butter and I'm just going to start flattening it between my fingertips. Now, as I flatten it, it's going to want to break apart into a few pieces, which is good. I want that to happen. I need it to break apart a little bit because whenever you're making a flaky pastry, the bigger you leave your fat pieces, the flakier it will be, but the less sturdy it will be. So we're trying to find kind of this perfect balance of having enough sturdiness in our crust, but also keeping it super, super flaky. So you're going to have pieces of butter, some small, some big, but all flattened down. So if I flatten a piece and it doesn't want to break apart on me at all, I will help it and break it apart a little bit. But I'm just going to flatten every single piece into flat sheets, working kind of quickly. Okay, all of my butter is flattened down. I'm going to give that a quick toss. You'll see it's very textured. There's lots of big pieces, lots of little pieces. It's very incohesive. So now we're going to come in with our water. And you're going to need about 6 to 8 tablespoons of water, which is about 60 to 90 milliliters of water. But truthfully, I'm not even going to measure it. So I am just going to start by drizzling about a tablespoon into my cup. This is ice water. You want it to be very cold because we're trying to keep our butter nice and cold. I just drizzled that in, and then instead of mixing, I'm tossing. So I'm going to come in with an open hand, and I'm just scooping underneath the ingredients and tossing. I'm going to turn my bowl and toss, and turn my bowl and toss. As soon as it feels like that water has been absorbed, I'm going to drizzle a little bit more in. And I'm going to go slow with this because it's very easy to go too far. And it's kind of hard with a pie dough to work more flour in. It's always easier to add more liquid. So I'm going to go slow, and I'm going by look. What I'm looking for here is I'm looking for everything to start clumping together. I want every bit of this to be in big clumps, and for none of this little powdery dry bits to be happening. So I'm just going to keep adding and tossing until I get that. I'll show you what it should look like. Getting really close here. Everything is starting to clump together. See how I have these big clumps forming? But it's still a little bit dry. It's still kind of crumbly. I want it to be all clumped up. So this tossing motion is really helping prevent too much gluten formation, because As soon as water comes into contact with flour, the proteins in the flour are going to start bonding together and starting to form into gluten. And the more you work them, it's kind of like a muscle, the stronger it becomes, and that's where we get chewiness. So see how everything is in these big clumps, all like this? This is perfect. This is exactly what we're looking for. You want everything to be in big clumps. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to gently, very gently, every time you're handling pie dough, you're not being aggressive, you're not mushing, you're just being very gentle. I'm going to gather all of this together. I should also say this is enough for a single pie crust, like a 9-inch. It'll work for a deep dish or a regular pie plate. If you are doing a double crust, you'll want to double this. I'm just going to gently press this together. Now, you can leave it like this. I just like to go ahead and get it in a circle and kind of press it flat into a disc. And then you could chill this just like this. But if you want extra flakiness, we can do a little faux laminating on it where we're going to add some layers to it. So I'm just going to kind of gently press it down. And then I'm just going to take my bench knife and cut it in half and stack it on top of each other. I'm turning it 90 degrees, gently press it down, and I'm going to cut it in half and stack it on each other. I only do that about 3 or 4 times. I'm being very, very gentle. I don't want those pieces of butter to become too cohesive with my dough. But what happens now is we're having layers of butter throughout our dough. Those flat sheets of butter are going to act like little steam pockets in the oven and create all these little flaky sheets of layers to create lots of flakiness. All right, so now that I did a quick little laminating, I'm just going to press this down into a disc and wrap it to refrigerate. I'm going to chill this in the refrigerator. Now, if you're in a hurry, you can go in the freezer for like 20 minutes, or you can go in the refrigerator for at least an hour and up to 2 days, or the freezer for up to 3 months. The chilling process not only lets our butter re-solidify so that it stays nice and solid, so that we can have all those little steam pockets, but it also lets the flour finish hydrating fully, and it also lets the gluten relax. So if you've ever tried to roll out a piece of dough and it keeps snapping back on you, that's because the gluten is tight. And right after you work a dough, the gluten is going to be tight, no matter how gentle you were with it. So we're going to let it relax in the fridge, and it will roll out for us very easily. Okay, it is time to roll out our pie crust. It's really nice and cold. Now, if you pull yours out of the refrigerator and it feels so firm that it's going to be really difficult to roll out, just leave it sit for about 5 minutes and it will take the chill off a little bit and you should be able to roll it out. But you do want it to be very cold when you're rolling it. So I'm going to very liberally dust the work surface here. You can be pretty hefty-handed with it here. This flour is not going to get worked into your dough. It's just going to sit on the surface and really ensure that our pie crust does not stick. And if we have a lot of excess in the end, we can just kind of dust it off the pie crust. So I'm going to unwrap my pie dough here, and I'm also going to dust the top of it pretty heavily here because I really don't want my pie crust to stick to the rolling pin. Now, I prefer a rolling pin like this that doesn't have the handles. I think you have better control. But if you have a rolling pin that has handles, I think you'll have better control if you keep your hands towards the center. And in fact, even with this rolling pin, I do keep my hands a little more towards the center rather than all the way out to the sides because I find that you're just going to have more even rolling. So I like to set my rolling pin right in the middle of my dough. I'm going to give my pressure across the dough, not down into the counter. So I am using some pressure and kind of telling the dough where to go, but the pressure is going across the counter. So I start in the center, I give pressure across, I come back to the center, I bring pressure back towards me. Now I'm going to rotate. Start in the center, pressure across, back to the center, pressure towards me, and rotate. And I'm going to continue rotating my dough as I roll it because this is going to help me keep it a little bit more circular, and also I'm constantly checking for sticking. If it feels like it's sticking to the counter, then I'm going to redistribute flour underneath it and make sure it's not sticky. Now, if you get to the point where there are parts of your dough that are a little thicker and parts of it that are thinner, you're going to take your rolling pin, you're going to set it right on that thick part, you're going to put your hands right isolated in that area and tell it, I want you to move this way. You're going to tell the dough where you want it to go. You can kind of do these isolated movements to get the dough to go in the direction you want it. Now, you can see my edges are not perfectly rounded off here. That's okay, we're going to trim them. If your dough starts cracking, you're just going to use the warmth of your hands and start pushing it back together. I'm trying to roll this out to be about 1.5 to 2 inches wider than my pie plate all the way around, because I want it to sit naturally down into my pie plate without having to stretch, because stretching it will make it shrink up on me. So my dough is rolled out. You can see all of those chunks of butter, all those flat sheets of butter in it. That's going to be all our flakiness. I'm going to lay my pie plate on top and make sure that it is big enough all the way around so that it can sit naturally down into the pie plate. Okay, now we need to transfer this. Now, some people, there are different methods people use. Some people will fold it in quarters. What I like to do is set my rolling pin right in the center of the piece of dough. I'm going to bring the side that's the furthest away from me and just kind of fold it over the top of my rolling pin. Now I'm going to set my pie plate right in front of it and lift this up and just kind of center that edge right over that, and then just go ahead and unroll that right over the top, okay? So now we are sitting on the pie plate. Now if you see here, my dough is kind of stretching across. I want it to sit naturally down into the pie plate. I want dough to be touching pie plate all the way around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on one edge. I'm going to lift it up so that it naturally falls in and kind of use my hand just to make sure that that edge is touching pie plate. So I'm just going to go all the way around, lift up, let it fall down, let it sink in, and now we are sitting down all the way around. Now we need to make our edges look pretty. Now this is going to be for a pumpkin pie, so it's just a single crust pie. I'm going to go ahead and trim my edges and crimp my edges. If you're doing a double crust pie like an apple pie, you would now add your filling, add your top crust, and then you would crimp the top and the bottom together. So I like to leave about a little more than a ½ inch of dough all the way around, probably more like a 3/4 of an inch of dough all the way around. So I'm just taking some scissors and I'm just trimming that up to make it somewhat even. It doesn't need to be perfect. I'm just trimming off all of that excess. Now, if you're trimming this and you notice that, oh, maybe this side was really short and you don't have enough to even have any overhang over here, you can take one of your scrappy pieces of dough and just use the warmth of your hand and kind of press it in to even it out. You can always patch your pie dough. You will not be able to tell in the end if you patched your pie dough. It's totally fine to do that. Okay, so it's somewhat even all the way around. It's not perfect, but that's okay. So I'm going to take this edge and fold it under and almost tuck that little edge right inside the lip of my pie plate all the way around to kind of build up this little tall edge for myself so that I can do a really pretty crimp on it. Okay, so now that I have this tall lip all the way around my pie plate, I can do a few things. I can take a fork and dip that in flour and press it around into a fork crimp. But what I like to do is a simple scalloped crimp. I think it looks pretty. So I'm going to get some flour on my fingers so I don't stick to the dough. I'm going to use my index finger and my thumb coming in from the outside of my crust, and I'm going to use my index finger coming from the inside of my crust. So I'm going to push the inside index finger in between my thumb and other index finger and just give a little squeeze. Now the next one's going to start right where that first scallop ended and just continue pushing this. Crimp that all the way around. Now I'm making a pumpkin pie with this, so I need to blind bake this, which means I need to bake it without its filling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick little dock on the dough, which is just pricking the dough with a fork. I'm going to take a fork and just do a few all around the bottom and then just a couple around the sides. This is going to help it stay in place and not puff up too much. Now, of course, a pumpkin pie filling is liquid, but as this bakes, those holes will kind of fill in. But I also need to weigh this down with pie weights. So you're going to take a piece of parchment paper, or some people will use foil, but I think parchment paper works a little better. And then I'm just going to crumple this all up just so it's a little easier to mold to the pie shell. Just like that. And then I'm going to gently set this down into my pie plate, trying not to ruin all of the pretty crimped edges I just made. Okay. Now we need to fill this up with something that will hold it in place. Because we don't have a filling in here, it needs to have something to hold it in place. So you can buy pie weights. You need a few sets of them because this needs to be filled all the way up, and for some reason they do not sell them in a quantity that will fill them all up. But I just use rice. You can also use dried beans. I use this over and over again. If you could see this close up, it's very toasted because I've used it so many times. So I'm just going to gently pour this rice in here, making sure I'm not actually getting it into the pie plate. I just want it to stay in the parchment. And I'm going to spread it out so it's all the way up to the edges. And then I'm going to add more. I want it to be completely full. Okay, so the rice is filling it all the way up. That's really going to make sure it stays in place and does not shrink up on me. I have my oven preheating to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 200 degrees Celsius. And I have a sheet pan inside the oven preheating because I want to set this on a hot pan so that the bottom of my crust starts cooking really fast and makes that really, one, it makes it set really fast, and also it makes it nice and crispy. I'm going to do that for about 15 minutes, and then I will take the pie weights out and let it go for a few more minutes. I'll show you. In about 15 minutes, so I am going to remove the pie weights now. The crust is set enough that I can remove them so that the bottom of the crust can finish cooking. And you just got to be really careful that you're gathering all of the parchment into the middle so that you don't spill rice down into the pie plate. And then I'm going to continue baking this for about like 6 to 8 more minutes until the bottom of the crust doesn't look raw anymore, basically. And then that's it. Okay, so the pie crust is finished being blind baked. It is cooled down. I'm getting ready to bake the pumpkin pie, and I want to show you how you can kind of protect the edges so that they don't get too dark. Now, I do want to say, don't be scared of some color on the crust of your pie. Color is flavor. I wouldn't mind getting a little more color on this, but I'm going to show you how you can kind of like protect it while the filling is baking. So they do make pie crust shields that are like silicone that go around the edge of your pie. Also, there are a lot of tutorials about how to take a piece of foil and cut it in all these fancy ways to make it like perfectly fit around your pie. This is what I do. I think it's the fastest and easiest. So I just have a sheet pan. I have a really big piece of tin foil, and I just take it and I just start kind of bringing it around the side of the pie and just kind of going around that edge all the way around. Just like that. So I do this at the beginning. Sometimes people will tint foil over it like during the baking process, but for a pumpkin pie, I just do this right at the beginning. I just kind of wrap it all around, and now I'm going to pour my pumpkin pie filling in here and bake it, and that's going to protect the edges so that they don't get too brown. I'll show you when it comes out. My pie is out of the oven, and I can just go ahead and unwrap this. It's actually already cooled. It's been out of the oven for a little while here, and you can just kind of gently unwrap it. And now I have a beautifully baked pumpkin pie, and my edges are not overbaked. So that's how I do it. Bye.